what is hope? And not just what does hope offer or how does it impact one's life, but what is the meaning of the word itself? What is its essence as you dig deeper into it? Well, Google gave me a couple of helpful definitions. One of them says a feeling of expectation and desire for a particular thing to happen. Hope is an optimistic state of mind that is based on an expectation of positive outcomes with respect to events and circumstances in one's life or the world at large. As a verb, it includes expect with confidence and to cherish desire with anticipation. I find it interesting that both definitions should include the idea of desire and expectation, perhaps the desire of wanting a better life in the present, or perhaps the expectation that things will get better in the future. And words like optimism and positivity are attached to the concept of hope. Well, this got me thinking, and I wanted to dig even deeper. Some of you may remember the classic 1994 film, The Shawshank Redemption, which depicts, spoilers ahead, an innocent man who was sentenced to life for a crime he didn't commit. Although the movie sets you up to make you think he did it at first, but through this process of imprisonment, yes, not only does he escape through the walls, but also the whole film is trying to show how he is going through this redemptive process. It is the idea that even in the loneliest and darkest places, you can find hope. And it is that redemption and that hope that enables him to see freedom, both physically and emotionally and spiritually, coming out a new person. And when the director was making this film, he said in a documentary once, I wanted to make a film about hope. And not just a film with hopeful elements, but a film that is about hope in and of itself. And he discovered while making the film that it is very hard to make films like this, and it is also hard for films like this to be successful. But The Shawshank Redemption was very successful when it came out. Perhaps the reason for this is because of the way we as humanity find it hard to be in that frame of mind, to be in the right place to receive hope sometimes. Grace freely given, and yet sometimes we find it hard to receive it. Another genre of films that is one of my favourites also is the futuristic sci-fi films. And we see this kind of imagery where we have apocalyptic and a dystopian society. And what is interesting about these kinds of films is that the catastrophic fear side of stories are often more popular than the hopeful ones. We may find fear when those doors are knocking on our fear and our perhaps worry about the future. We are often interested in the things we're afraid of. Dare I admit, perhaps we find comfort sometimes in the idea of a coming apocalypse. And the reason I'm talking about movies here is because I think this gives us a great insight into the way our society and culture is formed and expressed. You can find out many truths in the creative arts. Poetry has 1,000 meanings in one line. And when we're thinking about films and genres, many comedians have acknowledged that scaring people is easy, but making people laugh, that's quite difficult. Which is why the horror franchise is so successful, whereas a comedy film is a little bit more give and take. So too, may I suggest, that scaring people is easy, but giving people hope is hard. Because sometimes we're not in a position to receive it. Maybe the circumstances around us convinces us that we cannot receive it. Perhaps some underlying guilt has stopped us from receiving it. Of course, on the other end, there are those who will embrace it as much as they can. And it is into this context that I just wonder how the Easter story and the resurrection can speak to us today. Another story that is 2,000 years old, perhaps one that is familiar by many, unknown by others. I often wonder, what is the resurrection exactly? How do we explain this mystery? What does this 2,000-year-old story have to say to us today? And I think the problem, at least for me, is that I have become so familiar with it, I've perhaps lost its depth. And if someone to ask me, what is the resurrection about? I would wonder what kind of answer would I come up with. We celebrate this every year on our calendar, which has benefits, of course, because we can do creative things. There are many opportunities when it comes up every year. Do we perhaps run into the problem of tradition replacing deep truth? What has been good for me in my thought process is somehow bringing it back to that first question. What is hope? Resurrection and hope must go hand in hand. But how? How do we explain this? Well, many may think about the overall narrative of the Bible and link the resurrection in with that somehow, with that greater plan. God created the world, sin came into it, and then we have the Old Testament where God gave a bunch of laws, and then some prophets came along. But ultimately, there was a better plan, there was a bigger plan of sending Jesus into the world, God in human flesh. He would die on the cross for the sins of the world. He would then be buried for 3 days and on the third day raised to life, showing us that he has conquered sin and death. And many have written extensively on this story and tried to look into it in a deep theological way. And don't get me wrong, I believe in it, and I do think it is important. But I just wonder, does that really help me understand the essence of what the resurrection is in my personal life and in your personal life? What is hope? What is hope for you? I want to know what the resurrection means for us emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. I want to know what this means for a society that somehow finds pleasure in those futuristic, dystopian scientific stories. I want to discover how hope and resurrection are connected. Perhaps a bit like Paul when he said, I want to know Christ, yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death. Well, I know I'm sort of setting myself up here to give you the ultimate answer perhaps you have never thought of regarding the resurrection. And I hate to disappoint you, but the truth is, I don't know. I don't have it. But what I can give you, perhaps, is a personal experience, sharing that and engaging with this from a personal and emotional level, and perhaps you can connect to this, bringing it back to what is hope. Let's return to Hollywood for a moment, just again, because when we think about the Shawshank Redemption, perhaps we can relate this to our spiritual state of mind sometimes. The whole experience of imprisonment with your own thoughts and perhaps your own circumstances that makes you feel that hope is void. We feel like we're the only ones who can see it and no one else can see it on the outside. Because when we start to look at this film, we see that it is rich and full of Christian imagery and symbolism. First of all, we have the warden who says he's a Christian and he's quoting the Bible here and there and everywhere, but we find out he's corrupt himself because he involves himself in murder. And very much I think he represents the Pharisees and the Sadducees of that religious system. All words, no play, preach but no practice, the hypocritical manner. And then within the movie, the main character goes through this redemptive process. And it's not suggesting that the main character is Jesus, but he is entering into this dialogue. And little glimpses of dialogue here and there where they say things like, we felt like free people once again, if only for a short time. Or the words between Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman, hope is a dangerous thing. No, Red, hope is a good thing. During our dark times, getting it while you can, embracing it while you can is something to be cherished. And then we have his cell poster covering up the empty hole, or perhaps the empty tomb, which is his road to freedom, just like the stone Jesus rolled away when he came out of the tomb, coming out of that darkness and into a new light. And he crawls through the sewers to a clean river, to which he then forms the shape of the cross. And then he later meets his friend on the beach, fixing his boat. Again, very much a strong image of Jesus. To feel like you're in a dark tunnel sometimes, but knowing that there is clean water ahead. For Jesus having to go through so much pain, but knowing there was a glorious moment after that. I think I'm beginning to understand these definitions now. The expectation of something better, a desire and a reason to be hopeful in the present. Therefore, the resurrection for me right now is a way of helping me bring all these stories together. The same narrative, fear and anxiety in the garden, in the dark place, the trauma of experiencing physical death, or feel like we're coming near to that. But then hope comes. Yes, the resurrection has theological power, but for me, it is not just that, it is a process to be experienced, as we also enter into our dark tombs and come out with Christ on the other side. This is what it means for the hope of the resurrection to be for those who struggle with mental health, depression. The hope that Jesus can bring to someone who has been told by the doctor they only have 3 months left. That even in those moments, there are glimpses of hope. By identifying with the Saviour who went through the same things. Which is why the New Testament over and over again has a lot to say about hope. May the God of hope fill you. Rejoice in hope. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for. And this one I find interesting. But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Again, sometimes we struggle to see it in front of our own eyes, but knowing that it is ahead. I need to be in a place to receive it. Like society who love the dystopian films, are we also in a position to receive the hopeful and redemptive films, to receive that message? And another key verse from the resurrection narrative is this one: why do you look for the living among the dead? Am I looking in the right places? Or has my dark cell taken me to the wrong places? In all my battles and doubts, am I still able to have that assurance of goodness and light having the final say in the end? Perhaps the resurrection is simply a gentle reminder that grace is still there, even if we think we've lost it or lost confidence in it. It turns out that the resurrection is not just everything, but rather it is the first question for the rest of our lives, a question that we need to remind ourselves over and over again, no matter what our state of being is. No matter what we think the future is going to bring, how we can find that light in that situation. What is hope? Perhaps the story of the resurrection is challenging me right now to do my uttermost best to choose life. Deuteronomy 30 verse 5, I set before you life and death, choose life. Or to bring it back to our film, in the words of Morgan Freeman, get busy living or get busy dying. The things to long for, the desire for things to live for. Again, in the words from the film, I hope I can make it across the border. I hope to see my friend and shake his hand. I hope the Pacific is as blue as it has been in my dreams. I hope.